Hello, physical science students. This is Mr. Kraft coming to you from my room at Cal. The last time we talked a bit about work, energy, and power, and we just got into simple machines. That's what I want to talk about in more detail today. Except I want to write it a little bit better looking. Simple machines. And we said machines in general, simple machines in particular, allow us to do work more efficiently. And we said that means allow us to do work with less wasted energy. There are some different categories of simple machines. There is the lever. You have a long object, a stick or a rod or a beam or a bar, which sits on a fulcrum, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, with a weight. You pull down on one end, the other end goes up. That's the simplest version of it. Then you have one of the great human inventions that allowed a whole lot of stuff later on, the wheel and axle. And, the invention of the wheel, which would have been in the probably late Stone Age, early Bronze Age, is considered a turning point in human history. It allowed chariots and carts and various kinds of vehicles. Nowadays, cars, trains, even airplanes have wheels to land on. But there's other areas where wheels are used. We don't tend to think of them like that. But we talked about the pulley last time. A pulley has a little groove where the rope goes through. But what is the pulley itself? It's just a wheel. There's an axle. It's not as long as on perhaps a car's wheel. But there's an axle that goes through the middle of it. The pulley turns around. The pulley is just a wheel. It's just a wheel with a slot. And you can put pulleys together in block and tackles like we showed last time in various other configurations and do all kinds of things. Then you have the inclined plane. The most common examples we see are ramps. A ramp is just an inclined plane because if you were sliding or pushing a box or a heavy weight up a ramp, that would be much, much easier than if you tried to lift it that same height directly. Okay, so of all these things, we'll be looking at them bit by bit in coming lessons. But the levers are what I want to focus on today. Okay, we're on page. Okay, let me change colors back. Sorry about that. Page 135 in your textbook. And the example of a lever it gives is a children's seesaw. It's a very badly drawn seesaw. That's a little bit better. And you have a rigid bar. It must be rigid. If it were made of rubber and it bent or was floppy or something, it wouldn't work. The little point along which it rocks back and forth is a fulcrum. And the example they're giving here is a seesaw. When I was a kid, we called them a teeter-totter. Same thing. And of course, the seesaw can go back and forth depending upon the forces that the kids riding on it apply to it. Not the greatest artwork in the world here, but we'll do what we can. So it goes this way, and then it goes back that way, and so forth. Okay, so this guy over here, where there are no kids on it, and there's no forces on it, and it's totally balanced, we call that a fancy word. Rotational equilibrium. Rotation just means to go around in circles. That's all rotation means. Obviously, a seesaw can't go in a full circle. The person on the bottom would hit the ground. But it's circular in the way it's going. So rotational just means going in a circle. Equilibrium means balance. So in other words, all the forces affecting this are all balanced out and no motion is occurring. So a balanced seesaw is in rotational equilibrium. It's not moving anywhere, it's not going anywhere, it's not doing anything. Okay. Well, these forces, like on a seesaw, maybe they're going to push it that way. It starts out balanced so that you're rotating around a fixed point. Now, of course, you can't rotate all the way around with a seesaw. But you could, for example, and this is on the next page, page 136. If you had a nut and you had a wrench, say a crescent wrench, around that nut, you could rotate that wrench completely in a circle as you are undoing the nut. You're screwing it out from whatever it's attached to. So a force rotating something around a fixed point is called torque. Torque. Yes, I know it spells strange. Torque comes from a Latin word that means to twist. You are twisting around and around and around the nut to take it off. Maybe even a better example, an everyday example of torque. If you have a bottle of pop and it has a lid on it, and you are twisting that lid off by turning it in a circle, guess what? You are applying torque to it. So you twist a cap off of a bottle. That's an everyday example of torque. And the other examples are taking a nut out of something, the forces of applying to a seesaw. All of those are examples of torque. Now, I'm not going to go into the math of it that much, but I have to address it a little bit. So, usually on a properly made seesaw, the fulcrum is the point at which it turns, is in the middle. So if I call this L1 for length 1, and I call this L2 for length 2, they're about equal. So the only thing that would affect the forces would be the weights of the persons sitting on it. If I had a very heavy person on one end and a very light person on the other, the heavy person will produce more force, obviously. But if it's not balanced, where the second length is greater than the first length, well, even if the person on this end is fairly light, they have a greater advantage, a greater mechanical advantage than the person on this side. And this brings us to the equation. This is in the top part of page 136. Okay, so to describe what we're talking about here, W1 is the weight of the first person, if you want to think of this as like a seesaw. But you don't have to think of it that way. If you think of a lever, and here's an object like a rock that I'm trying to lift, the force would be the rock's weight, and the force of me pulling down on that lever is the force of me pulling on it. So you could use F for the weights here, but we're using the seesaw example. So this is weight 1. How much force, how much weight's being applied on this side. Now, the distance from here to the fulcrum is what we call the torque arm. Don't be freaked out by that, okay? Because it's just terminology. Arm, because it's like an arm of a lever. Torque, because you're applying that circular force, like on a wrench or twisting off the cap of a bottle. So that distance is called the torque arm. And that's L1. Well, the other side's going to be L2, the second torque arm, and the second force. And first weight times the first torque arm has to be equal to the second weight times the second torque arm, because conservation of energy, that has to all balance out. So what we see here is a bad lever, but that's okay. Actually, let me just clear the board and draw it new. Okay. That's not much better. Okay, that's a little bit better. We'll go with it. So there's your first torque arm, and there's your second torque arm. Here's a big weight, and here's my hand making a fist around it, pulling down so that I can lift this thing up. So the way this works, maybe the weight of this rock is pretty big, and maybe the weight or force produced by me pulling down is pretty small. But this length is very small, so a small thing times a big number is going to make a result that's smaller. Whereas this great long piece of lever, this long torque arm, multiplies my small force and makes it much bigger. So even though the rock weighs a lot, maybe I couldn't even lift it by myself, the lever allows me more efficiently to do that, because W1 L1 has to equal W2 L2. So the bigger this weight is, the shorter I have to make this, and the longer I have to make that, so that I can lift it up as a lever. Now, if any of this seemed confusing to you, we might do one or two simple examples of computations with this, but I don't want to go too deep into the math. So if you're not 100% clear on this, I want you not to worry about it too much. I'm going to wrap up the video right now. The next time we'll talk about the classes, the types of lever. So I will talk to you again soon, and I hope everything is going well. Bye.